I think when people don't look up, when they walk around either looking at their feet or they simply look at the stores and the spaces that are at eye level, they're missing a real visual treat. There's a wonderful richness of architecture to be seen at the second and third and fourth floors of these buildings. In most cases, it has changed. The first floor is radically different from the second. The quality of the design, the architecture, the imagination, the color, the texture, all kinds of things of those upper floors are far more interesting and far more enjoyable to see than the very bland glass and aluminum storefronts that we usually have at the ground level. Looks to be about 1870s or 1880s building. Below that single window, we see this insult Carrara glass, and then down below at the main level, of course, is a totally anonymous aluminum and glass storefront window. You notice that there's the front doors of the building are practically halfway down inside the building. Hopefully they think they have you trapped by the time you get there. This is the Old Queen Theater, which I think dates from the golden age of movie theater design, that is the 1920s. What has happened now at the first level shouldn't happen to any building. When the marquee was ripped off, a so-called permastone type of fake stone material, which is actually cement with color in it, was applied somehow to make the building seem newer or more modern or at least different. Here on Market Street, there are actually a number of houses left, buildings I believe that date from the late 18th century. Many generations ago, the lower floors were turned into shops and totally altered. The more fashionable shops moved uptown, and so these few survivors of houses are still here, and the less fashionable, less desirable shops opened up, and therefore it was not worthwhile tearing down these old houses. We're standing in front of what I think is probably the only truly original storefront. We've been talking about storefronts added to existing old buildings. Well, here's an old building with its original storefront. This is the kind of thing which architectural historians just love to look at, especially in this condition when it's all peeling and hasn't been fancied up, hasn't been restored, over-restored. Virtually nothing has been changed here. You can imagine what this place would be, what these would be like if this were Georgetown in Washington or something, or, I mean, in terms of desirability, you can just, or even Society Hill, Philadelphia. It's all economics.
Look toward the camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's a true survivor. This storefront is certainly an original one from probably the 1880s, maybe even the 1870s. Very large glass windows. It's hanging on with nothing but a bit of metal strapping holding it all together. But at the time when it was new, it certainly sits below a exercise in wood of what is usually in stone in Gothic cathedrals and early churches. There are cross-ribbed vaults and an object called a boss in the center that's taken directly from Gothic architecture. The whole is very light and delicate. Even the secondary entrance door, not the one to the store, but the entrance door that goes to the spaces on the upper floors, is treated with its own little barrel vault of wood with drop finials. One's missing on this side, but all in very bad shape, but certainly something that is not going to be here very long and is worth recording. This is the kind of thing which architectural historians just love to look at, especially in this condition when it's all peeling and hasn't been fancied up, hasn't been restored, over-restored. Virtually nothing has been changed here other than to add the convenience of electricity.
Did you start that by saying that?
I said it was a survivor of... I did it over again.
You did?
Yeah.
But you did indicate that here's a case where...
Yeah.
what's
Here's
changed.
one, I said we've been talking about changes at the ground level. Here's one that hasn't changed. I mean, that is essentially what I'm trying to say.
What year did you place this?
I would guess 1880s.
Obviously, we've made it since then. Don, what are people missing when they are not aware of some of these buildings that you pointed out to us?
I think they're missing a visual treat.
Say it, the whole thing.
I think when people don't look up, when they walk around either looking at their feet or they simply look at the stores and the spaces that are at eye level, they're missing a real visual treat. As you walk up or down Market Street, as in any older city street in this country, retail city street, there's a wonderful richness of architecture to be seen at the second and third and fourth floors of these buildings. In most cases, it has changed. The first floor is radically different from the second, third, and fourth floors.
Do these buildings tell us anything about our ancestors?
I think we can find out a lot about our ancestors or the way our forebears saw themselves, saw the businesses that they had by the architecture that they commissioned and built. And this architecture is not visible at the ground floor anymore. It is only visible above the ground floor where changes have not been made.
When you see these buildings, what's atop the first floor, what is it to you? What do you feel? What are the sensations you feel?
When I see buildings above the first floor, particularly the kind we've been looking at today, I feel a certain sadness, actually, at the fact that they have been totally ignored by the treatment that they've received at the first level. In many cases, in most cases, in fact, the quality of the design, the architecture, the imagination, the color, the texture, all kinds of things of those upper floors are far more interesting and far more enjoyable to see than the very bland glass and aluminum storefronts that we usually have at the ground level.
But what is the history of Market Street? What do these buildings tell us about what took place here on Market Street?
Here on Market Street, there are actually a number of houses left, buildings I believe that date from the late 18th century that were actually houses when they were originally built. Of course, many generations ago, the lower floors were turned into shops and totally altered. I think that particularly the houses are left, which are left, are in Lower Market Street in the 2nd and 3rd Street areas where I believe that the more fashionable shops moved uptown And so these few survivors of houses are still here, and the less fashionable, less desirable shops opened up, and therefore it was not worthwhile tearing down these old houses. As we move further up Market Street, we can see what were the grand stores of the time, this entire region. This was the place to shop, this was the place to eat, this was the place to go to the theater and to the movies, this was the place to be seen, this was the place to promenade. And the buildings themselves, again, above the first floor level, are, to me, indicative of the pride and the aggressiveness, if you will, that the merchants and the businessmen of the city of Wilmington had, particularly in the latter part of the 19th century and the first part of this century.
You mentioned that these buildings were their logos. Say that again.
A lot of these buildings really were the logos, or actually created the image for the merchants and for the businessmen who built them. This is, of course, still going on in modern office buildings. The corporate structure likes to be seen and reflected in the quality of the design and in the latest image kind of architecture. The so-called signature building, for instance, that the Hercules Plaza is now. But the buildings here on Market Street, really, this facade was the physical front. This was the advertisement for the business.
You had mentioned before that these buildings reflected the pride of the people who built them. Is there not comparable pride today about the buildings in which people work and live?
I think today there is a comparable pride, a comparable desire for the building itself to speak something about the company or the individual that built it, to do more than simply house the functional stores or offices. I think this is going on today. I think it's been going on for centuries.
If you had your way, as the architect that you are, what would you do about some of these buildings that you have been showing us here on Market Street?
If I had my way, I would immediately put a ban on all demolition of any buildings along Market Street. I would then require the owners to refurbish and restore the lower levels of the buildings to what, as accurately as possible, might have been those first floors of the buildings themselves when they were first built.
Why is that important to do something like that?
I wouldn't require them to do anything, but I think something like that would be important because it would allow not only our own generation but later generations to be able to see what the building, a city like Wilmington was in its golden age of its downtown, which it certainly, unfortunately, is not today. And we have to go to places like Williamsburg, or closer to home, we can go to Newcastle, where things have not changed because Newcastle was bypassed by civilization, or by progress, if you will, and so much of it remains just as much as Market Street remains today.
That was very good. Could you tell me that same thing that you said in this last statement in shorter form? You want to think about it a moment?
Okay. You mean about Newcastle and about,
yeah, about,
or
about the fact that we saw something about the history of Wilmington, about people and so forth, and that it was important to preserve it.
Okay, let me think a minute.
We have something about being bypassed too. By what?
Progress.
By progress.
This part of Market Street in Wilmington that we've been looking at today, I think, has been bypassed by progress. The buildings that we've seen are in real estate parcels that are not valuable, and therefore the buildings have remained and are there to tell us a story, the visual history of Wilmington. The town of Newcastle is a major example of an 18th and 19th century town that was bypassed by progress and was not worth tearing the buildings down, and that's why they're there and treasured today. if this Market Street could be thought of as Newcastle and is thought of as and treasured, then it would really be a remarkable, in fact, it could become a national attraction. I don't know, that's...
Good.
Yeah.
That's good. You weren't happy with that?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Might be our logo.
Actually, you could see more if you wanted to get a look how that's sagged. See that belt course between this second and third floor? You can imagine what this place would be, what these would be like if this were Georgetown in Washington or something, or
yeah.
I mean in terms of desirability, you can just, or even Society Hill, Philadelphia.
Well, it's very sad, I think, when they don't preserve these.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, it's all economics.
Of course, in Italy and France, they have no problem. They don't have the problems we have here because they're all stone.
Well, yeah, but they've also...
They're just dirty looking.
They still use them. I mean, they haven't, these are all empty here,
right,
and not used, or in many cases, I think further up, the lower levels still have stores, and the upper floors are completely empty. Of course, in the old days, they had different businesses. You'd look up and there was gold lettering on the windows as you went up, and you would walk up to a tailor or to a, sort of secondary kind of